Hi, I'm Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now! The climate crisis, the curtailment of reproductive rights, authoritarianism. These threats aren't looming. They're here now. If you believe Democracy Now!'s reporting on these issues is essential, please sign up for a monthly gift of $5, $10, or even $20. Go to democracynow.org to make your donation right away. Oh, and your gift will be matched dollar for dollar by a generous donor. Thank you so much. From New York, this is Democracy Now!
Nargis Mohammadi is a woman, a human rights advocate, and a freedom fighter.
One of Iran's most prominent human rights activists, Nargis Mohammadi, has won this year's Nobel Peace Prize, but she will not be able to receive the prize in Oslo personally since she's in prison in Tehran. We'll get the response. We'll also get an update on the civil fraud trial of Donald Trump.
No matter how powerful you are, no matter how much money you think you may have, no one is above the law. And it is my responsibility and my duty and my job to enforce it. The law is both powerful and fragile. And today in court, we will prove our case.
We'll also speak to an attorney suing Columbia University and its affiliated hospitals on behalf of some 300 more patients who say they were sexually assaulted by former Columbia University gynecologist Robert Haddon over a span of decades, while Columbia, they say, shielded the sexual predator. And we'll look at the largest strike of healthcare workers in U.S. history.
Yeah, we're out here because we want the world to know that Kaiser's being unfair to us. They're not treating us right. We're working through the pandemic. We're working through hard times. We're understaffed, underpaid. They're not giving us what we need to take care of our patients properly.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Biden's defending his decision to waive 26 federal laws in South Texas in order to speed construction of the U.S.-Mexico border wall. Biden's move to advance a central policy of former President Trump's platform has prompted condemnation from immigrant rights, environmental and indigenous activists. At the White House Thursday, a reporter asked Biden why he reversed his campaign pledge that, quote, there will not be another foot of wall constructed in my administration, he said.
I'll answer one question on the border wall. The border wall, the money was appropriated for the border wall. I tried to get them to reappropriate, to redirect that money. They didn't. They wouldn't. And in the meantime, there's nothing under the law other than they have to use the money for what it was appropriated. I can't stop that.
Do you believe the border wall works?
No.
Democratic Congressmember Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez slammed Biden's decision, writing, quote, a wall does nothing to deter people who are fleeing poverty and violence from coming to the United States. You do not risk your life or your children's lives going through the Darien Gap or traversing hundreds of miles of desert if you have any other options. Walls only serve to push migrants into more remote areas, increasing their chances of death, AOC said. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and Attorney General Merrick Garland were in Mexico City Thursday meeting with Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who condemned the border wall.
This authorization for the construction of the wall is a step backwards. It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. We have to address the causes.
Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas announced the U.S. will resume deportation flights directly to Venezuela, threatening Venezuelan asylum seekers with harsher consequences if they cross the U.S.-Mexico border. For years, the U.S. government did not regularly deport Venezuelans because of tensions between Washington and Caracas. Thousands continue to flee Venezuela due to an economic catastrophe that's been largely worsened by U.S. sanctions. New York City Mayor Eric Adams is on a 4-day Latin American tour to discourage would-be asylum seekers from trying to reach New York. Speaking from Mexico City Thursday, Adams warned the American dream could turn into a nightmare.
We are at capacity, and many people believe when you enter New York City, you're going to automatically have a job. You automatically are going to be living in a hotel, and there's just a climate that's there, and it's just not a reality.
Mayor Adams will also travel to Ecuador and Colombia and visit the treacherous Darien Gap that many migrants are forced to brave on their journey to the U.S.-Mexico border. Adams' trip comes 2 days after he asked a judge to suspend New York City's 42-year-old policy of providing shelter to anyone who seeks it. Immigrant rights groups blasted the move, with the Legal Aid Society warning, quote, street homelessness would balloon to a level unseen in our city since the Great Depression, unquote. Asylum seekers in New York have already been facing barriers getting basic assistance.
I come from Honduras, and I came here because they killed a brother and a nephew of mine. So I was afraid, and I came here. The truth is, I was waiting 24 hours for them to give me some clothes, but ultimately nothing came of it.
Ukraine says 51 people were killed and 6 others wounded Thursday as a Russian missile struck a store and a cafe in a village in the northeastern Kharkiv region. President Volodymyr Zelensky said the Russian assault was no accident.
The Russian military could not have been unaware of where they were hitting, and it was not a blind strike. People gathered there for a wake, a Christian memorial dinner. Who could launch a missile at them? Who? Only absolute evil. More than 50 people died. Among them was a child, a boy, 6 years old.
Separately, officials said a Russian strike on residential buildings in Kharkiv killed a 10-year-old boy and his grandmother while injuring 26 others. And Russian drones attacked a port in Ukraine's Odessa region early Friday, damaging a grain silo near the Danube River. Syria's health ministry says 89 people were killed and nearly 300 others wounded Thursday as a drone packed with explosives struck a military college graduation ceremony in the city of Homs. It was one of the deadliest strikes against Syrian forces in more than 12 years of civil war. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack, which Syria's government blamed on unspecified terrorist groups. Elsewhere, Kurdish fighters say recent Turkish airstrikes have killed at least 11 people across Kurdish-controlled parts of northeastern Syria, with 5 civilians among the dead. Turkey's intensified cross-border raids since Sunday, when a pair of attackers detonated a bomb outside government buildings in Ankara. Turkey blamed the attack on the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party and the closely affiliated Kurdish YPG militia, which is allied with the U.S. in its fight against ISIS. On Thursday, the Pentagon said one of its F-16 fighter jets shot down an armed Turkish military drone as it approached U.S. forces in Syria and ignored commands to change course. It was an unprecedented direct military exchange between Turkey and the U.S., 2 NATO allies. In Iran, activists are demanding justice for 16-year-old Armida Yerevan, who remains in a coma after an unexplained incident Sunday aboard a metro train near Tehran. Officials say Yerevan suffered a medical episode causing her to collapse and bump her head on the train door. Her friends and other eyewitnesses say members of the so-called Guardians of Hijab force entered into an altercation with her for not complying with Iran's strict dress code. This comes 1 year after the death of Mahsa Amini while in custody of Iran's morality police, which set off a nationwide uprising. In related news, this year's Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to the imprisoned Iranian human rights activist Narges Mohammadi, deputy head of Defenders of Human Rights Center, for her fight against the oppression of women in Iran. We'll have more on the Nobel Prize after headlines. Here in New York, a prisoner at the notorious Rikers Island jail was declared dead after he was found unresponsive in his cell Thursday morning. Manish Kunwar was just 27 years old. He's at least the 9th person to die in the custody of New York City Department of Corrections this year. In other news from New York, Frank James, who opened fire on a crowded subway train in Brooklyn in April of last year, received 10 life sentences Thursday. Each life sentence corresponds to an injured victim. No passengers were killed in the shooting. The judge said as he delivered the sentence, quote, "Each mass shooting constitutes an act of raw evil," he said. In a victory for voting rights, a federal court has selected a new congressional map in Alabama after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected a Republican gerrymandered map that diluted black votes. The voting age population of the new district is nearly 49% black and could send another Democrat to the U.S. Congress. And actor Julia Ormond is suing Harvey Weinstein for sexual assault. She's also suing Disney, Miramax, and her former talent agency, CAA, for negligence. Ormond, whose lawsuit comes as part of the Adult Survivors Act, says Weinstein forced her to perform oral sex on him when she told her talent agents Brian Lord and Kevin Huvane, she said, about the rape. They told her reporting it would damage her career and that she would not be believed. The CAA went on to drop her as a client. Ormond accuses Miramax and Disney Disney of enabling and covering for Weinstein. Julia Ormond headlined major films in the 90s, but her career waned in the years after the assault and her complaint to her agents. Weinstein is currently serving a 23-year prison sentence in New York for rape. Earlier this year, he was sentenced to 16 years for separate rape and sexual assault charges in California. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show with the Nobel Peace Prize. The chair of the Norwegian Nobel Committee in Oslo announced this year's winner earlier this morning.
San Zendegi Azadi. Women, life, freedom. The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2023 to Narges Mohammadi for her fight against the oppression of women in Iran and her fight to promote human rights and freedom for all. Her brave struggle has come with tremendous personal cost. Altogether, the regime has arrested her 13 times, convicted her 5 times, and sentenced her to a total of 31 years in prison and 154 lashes. Ms. Mohammadi is still in prison as I speak. This year's Peace Prize also recognizes the hundreds of thousands of people who in the preceding year have demonstrated against the theocratic regime's policies of discrimination and oppression targeting women.
That was Beatrice Andersen, the head of the Norwegian Nobel Committee in Oslo, announcing that the imprisoned Iranian human rights activist Narges Mohammadi has been awarded this year's Nobel Peace Prize. The announcement comes just a year after the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who died in Iranian police custody September 16th last year after she was arrested by Iran's so-called morality police. Her death sparked months of protests in Iran and a severe crackdown by Iranian authorities. To talk more about this year's Nobel Peace Prize laureate, we're joined by Negar Mortazavi. She's an Iranian-American journalist, host of the Iran podcast, senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. We thank you so much for being with us, Negar. Can you talk about the significance of this year's Nobel Peace Prize?
Thanks for having me, Amy. Yes, sure. So this doesn't come as a surprise. I think after 1 year of sustained protests by Iranian women and young girls, and so many activists and ordinary citizens really putting their lives on the front line, risking their lives, about 500 protesters losing their lives, protesting for more freedoms and essentially in part of a feminist uprising. And Narges Mohammadi is really one of the most deserved activists when it comes to the fight for rights for women, freedom for all, human rights. She has done a lot of campaigning against the death penalty, execution, and so many other parts of her long-term activism. And also, as it was discussed, at a great personal cost to herself and her family. So I think it's welcome news. This is going to energize, give new, fresh energy to the activists and protest movement inside Iran.
So tell us the story of Narges Mohammadi, how she is now in prison, how she got there.
Well, she's a longtime activist, human rights activist that has worked with different organizations, as you said, human rights defenders, which also the only Nobel Peace Laureate from Iran, Shirin Ebadi, also worked with. And Narges has really continued sort of that line of activism. She's been very vocal against the death penalty, as I said. She's launched many campaigns against essentially changing the laws of execution and trying to abolish the death penalty in the Iranian legal system. She's fought for Iranian women's rights, for political prisoners, for families, and herself has been a political prisoner, arrested many times, jailed to decades of prison in total, and also separated from her family. Her family has been pushed into exile, including her 2 children, and she's been living separate from them, not being able to travel to see them. They live in exile. They're not able to travel to